Hello and welcome to another video by Future Doc Explains. In today's video, we'll be walking through triglyceride biosynthesis. So triglycerides are the storage of fatty acids, and the way that you can get triglycerides into your body is either to eat them or to synthesize them. So triglyceride biosynthesis occurs in the liver, it occurs in the adipose tissue, and it occurs in the muscle. So the structure of a triglyceride is actually going to be a glycerol attached to three fatty acids, also known as acyl groups. So in order to make this triglyceride, we actually need a glycerol, so a glycerol 3-phosphate to be more specific, and we also need acyl-CoAs, which will be our fatty acids, and we're going to need three of these. So the glycerol 3-phosphate that is used for triglyceride biosynthesis can come from two places. It can either come from DHAP, and DHAP is a glycolytic intermediate, so it's one of the molecules that you see in glycolysis. So you can take that DHAP molecule from glycolysis and convert it to glycerol 3-phosphate, which can then be used in this pathway to make triglycerides. Or you can get glycerol 3-phosphate by simply just taking a normal glycerol molecule and adding a phosphate group to it in the liver. And the enzyme that would do this is called glycerol kinase. So as I mentioned earlier, triglyceride biosynthesis is the process of making triglycerides. And triglycerides are the storage of fatty acids, and the structure of that triglyceride is going to be a glycerol and three fatty acids. So in order to make this triglyceride, you're going to initially start with a glycerol 3-phosphate. That way you have your glycerol, and now all you need to do is add those three fatty acids. So the first thing we're going to do is add that first fatty acid. We're going to add that fatty acid in the form of acyl-CoA. So we're going to put in an acyl-CoA and we're going to get out a CoA. We actually only want to add the acyl group because that is the part that is actually the fatty acid. But in order to add it, it has to be attached to the CoA, and then we can remove that CoA as it's being added. So glycerol 3-phosphate is going to be, you're going to have a fatty acid added to it by adding in acyl-CoA and removing CoA. The enzyme that's going to do this is glycerol phosphate acyl transferase. The reason for this is because transferase literally means to transfer something, and more specifically, we're transferring an acyl group. So we're transferring an acyl group, and which molecule are we transferring it to? We're transferring it to glycerol phosphate. So the name of the enzyme is glycerol phosphate acyl transferase because we're transferring an acyl group to glycerol phosphate. So now what we have is our glycerol group attached to one fatty acid. This reaction is going to produce a molecule by the name of lysophosphatidic acid. Once we have produced lysophosphatidic acid, the next step is to go ahead and add that second fatty acid. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put in an acyl-CoA, and we're going to also remove that CoA at the same time of us putting it in. And the enzyme that's going to do this is acylglycerol phosphate acyl transferase. The reason for this is because we're transferring an acyl group to an acylglycerol phosphate. Why is it acylglycerol phosphate? Because up here we had glycerol phosphate, but then remember we added this acyl group, so that makes it acylglycerol phosphate acyl transferase. So now we have a glycerol with two fatty acids attached to it, and this molecule is going to be called phosphatidic acid. So before we can add that third triglyceride, before we can add that third fatty acid and make it a triglyceride, we need to remove that phosphate group. So the way that we remove that phosphate group is we're going to add in water. So H2O is going to come in and it's going to remove a phosphate group. This process is called phosphatase. And so the name of this enzyme is called phosphatidic acid phosphatase. Why? Because phosphatase means to remove a phosphate. And so we're removing a phosphate from phosphatidic acid. So this is called phosphatidic acid phosphatase. This will then produce the molecule diacylglycerol. Diacylglycerol is essentially a glycerol molecule attached to two fatty acids, and we no longer have that phosphate. So as you can see, we're almost getting close to that triglyceride because a triglyceride is a glycerol attached to three fatty acids. So now we're at our final step. And the last step is just going to be to add that last fatty acid in the form of acyl-CoA. So we're going to put in acyl-CoA, we're going to get out CoA, and the molecule that does this, or the enzyme that does this to be more specific, is going to be diacylglycerol acyltransferase. And this is because we're transferring an acyl group to diacylglycerol. And in the end, this will produce triacylglycerol. So this is the process of how our body can use fatty acids and glycerol that we already have to make triglycerides, which is going to be the storage form of those fatty acids. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please like, subscribe, and comment. That way more content like this will be available to many more YouTube users. If you have any questions, please reach out below the comments or email futuredocexplains@gmail.com. Thank you.